Art is the Swiss Army knife when it comes to human creativity. It can be used as an outlet for the most profound experiences and the most mundane ones. I've touched on this on my Horror Through Art video about how the reasons people make art can really vary widely, from wanting to connect with people to wanting to just express certain emotions that can't very easily be put into words. Well, some of these emotions are positive, but also a lot of these emotions that people might seek to express can be objectively very negative. For every artist that makes work about love or happiness, there's another that makes it about trauma or death. Both are valid expressions of art, just for the record, but I want to make it clear that I don't think these artists make art about such dark themes just for the sake of being sadistic. If anything, making art about things like this, I would say it's cathartic, you know? While not everyone can take it the way it's intended to, I think art like this ultimately does good. Topics like personal traumas can be considered way too much of a social taboo than they should be, but when pieces of media like this shed light on them, it can make the people who struggle with them feel less alone. What I want to argue is that horror movies and just horror in general can also achieve this aim. In my opinion, it's still a very valid branch of art, and horror movies also fall under that category. There are definitely some more niche films made by independent filmmakers that can portray this well for me, but I'm just gonna stick with the tried and true Midsommar. Midsommar is a very good example of how there can be real world issues put into a movie, and it's kind of relatable because of that. These underlying themes, I mean, are things like the death of a family member, or grappling with grief, or even losing connection with a partner you once were very close to. Even outside of the intended scary themes of this film, Danny feels like the world is falling apart around her. The elements of horror in this film, however, they're not compromised by these themes. In fact, I think it's the opposite. I think it makes it more believable, more real. The point of this movie, and all other movies really, I don't think it's ever to inflict lasting psychological damage. The point of expressing these personal and deeply negative experiences, it's with the intention to ultimately do good, but sometimes it doesn't always do that. Sometimes people can misunderstand these themes and underlying ideas. Sometimes people can understand them perfectly but take them too far. Sometimes this can come at the expense of a person's state of mind, or sometimes, in the worst situations, it can come at the expense of human life. This video is about when horror becomes too real. I want to be clear. There are absolutely loads of cases and things that have happened that fit the subject of this video, but I want to start with something that happened in the 1990s. It's called Ghostwatch, and the thing itself is a 90-minute program that aired on BBC in the UK. This was in 1992 specifically, and it followed a mother and her two daughters in the quote-unquote most haunted home in Britain. It was just for a night, and they documented a number of supernatural experiences that happened because the family believed they were being haunted by a poltergeist. There were two TV personalities that spent the night in the home with them, Michael Parkinson and Sarah Green, and they also had a camera crew accompanying them. They were outfitted with heat-seeking cameras, and the program itself was filmed in this kind of videotape style that really made it feel real. This program was, by all means, scripted, but the only thing was, not everyone who watched it knew that. There was a magazine known as the Radio Times that did an article about this program earlier, but it only detailed that this program was actually a drama inside the article, and not everyone read that. Certainly not the 11 million viewers that tuned into the program on Halloween night. Do keep in mind, a lot of people who tuned into this program that night were kids, and they were watching these with their families, who were equally horrified when they saw that the night slowly but gradually devolved into chaos. By the end of its 90-minute runtime, the ghost had hijacked the TV cameras, one of the daughters had been supposedly possessed, and one of the TV personalities, Sarah Green, had gone missing. One of the last shots of the program even showed paramedics and police arriving onto the scene. For the viewers who were watching this at home, it was entirely real to them. It was horrifying. The aftermath was pretty horrific too. There were millions of families who felt outraged, almost betrayed by BBC because they originally thought them to be a very trustworthy source. They didn't really think they'd do something like this. Children, too, were left scared and traumatized, and some even said they had nightmares for weeks on end after watching the program. But most notably, the aftermath of this program also caused one young man to take his life. The Denham family was like any other that had tuned into that program that Halloween night, with one exception. Their son, Martin, 18 years old, had noticed that the radiator in their home had been making some strange noises the past few nights. When he watched this program, something important is the fact that the poltergeist had first started out as the sounds of pipes being banged up against with no explanation. The family in the program had named the ghost pipes for this reason, and something about this triggered something in Martin. 5 days later, a suicide note read that if ghosts were real, he would rejoin his family as one in the afterlife. This sparked a special kind of outrage in anyone who heard about it, and understandably so, BBC distanced itself from the program Ghostwatch entirely. Some people, however, do think that Ghostwatch was a very important piece of horror history. Some people really enjoyed that it blurred the lines between reality and fiction, but I want to make it clear that it is definitely an irresponsible move that they didn't announce that it was fake, especially when they had such a large audience of especially kids. The Denham family was forever changed by this program, and while you could argue that maybe Martin had a predisposition to psychosis that wasn't entirely influenced by this program, it's still incredibly irresponsible of BBC to have done this. This is where I draw the line. But this specifically, it's an instance of a fictitious piece of media being presented as real and people taking it as reality with extremely negative consequences. There is another side to this coin though, and that's when fictitious pieces of media that are always made out to be fictitious are still made out to be real by certain people. This video isn't going to get any more lighthearted, as much as I would like to talk about more positive things, but I think because these topics are such a taboo, because they're so dark, that's what makes it even more important that we talk about them. Shoving these topics under the rug can only hurt us, and that's why I want to talk about the Slender Man stabbings. Now, this is the internet, and this was a very, very popular case when it first happened 10 years ago, but I'll give a little rundown just in case. Back in May of 2014, two 12-year-old girls lured a friend of theirs into the woods, stabbed her 19 times, and left her for dead. She didn't die. She actually managed to escape from the woods and get to a hospital and make a full recovery, but these two girls had done it in order to win favor with a character known as the Slender Man. The Slender Man himself is a creature of internet mythos. It's a long, slender figure, wears a suit and tie, and he has no face. I think what struck a particular chord with these girls was the fact that in a lot of interpretations of the Slender Man, he owns a mansion out in the woods that he lets children live in. Children that are popularly thought to live in this mansion are widely known as misfits, and that's mainly because they all have one common thing. They've killed people. Both of these girls were arrested. One was diagnosed with early onset schizophrenia and is in inpatient care to this day, and the other was desperate to win favor with any friends she could possibly make, and she's negotiated an early release. The girl they attempted to murder has since made a full recovery, as I said, and she's even gone into college to start studying medicine. The incident at the time was very, very infamous. I don't remember anyone who hadn't heard of it when it happened. It was widespread, really. News stations were talking about it. Everyone was. And a lot of people were talking about it in the context of fitting certain agendas of theirs. This isn't to say any news station blew it out of proportion. An attempted murder is still awful and a vile thing to have done, but I think what's to blame for it is kind of often misdirected. I think there's something to be said for this in the same way that there was a conversation online a while back about how video games can make people more violent. It's not true, I don't believe that a bit, but I think this kind of misconception can also be made about horror media. I think this especially happens with creepypasta stories, and even more especially the Slender Man, but There is something to be said about how this kind of thing can have a special effect on people who are already prone to it. The Slenderman stabbings, they're not an isolated incident. In fact, something similar happened in 2015, just a year later. Another 12-year-old, in the midst of struggling with very serious mental health issues, she'd even begged her father for help before it happened, but she stabbed her stepmother nearly to death just because a character known as the Laughing Jack supposedly told her to. If you're not familiar, the Laughing Jack is another creepypasta story. It goes something along the lines of an imaginary friend to a boy in the 1800s was left abandoned, and because of that he became very bitter and started killing people. I do think it's also important to note that this story did originate as a creepypasta. Much like Slenderman, it has a creator. Eric Knudsen created Slenderman, and a person on DeviantArt created Laughing Jack. These stories aren't always made to be known as explicitly fake, but they are creepypastas, and that comes with the assumption that they are fictitious. The average person who reads a creepypasta story really isn't likely to think it's real. But to these kids, it was real. This 12-year-old, along with stabbing her stepmother, she also set the apartment complex she lived in on fire. The same year, a 14-year-old did the same, lighting her house on fire because supposedly the Slender Man told her to. I want to talk about psychosis because of this, and stay with me here. Psychosis is, very broadly put, an umbrella term for a range of symptoms that kind of make a person feel a disconnect from reality. It's not just people who have schizophrenia who deal with psychosis either. In fact, even though it's mostly thought to happen because of underlying health issues, it can also happen because of things like drug use and poor sleep. Psychosis can present to an outsider looking in as something as simple as an individual pulling away from friends or family, but to the person who's experiencing it, it can also feel like you're thinking strange things that aren't exactly true to reality, or you're seeing things that aren't quite there, or hearing strange noises or even voices. This can also impact cognitive function too, making it difficult to communicate properly or think straight or behave rationally. What I'm trying to say is that horror media by itself, I think, is harmless. It can absolutely be enjoyed with no bad effects so long as someone is careful not to let it put them in a bad state of mind, but I think this presents a special challenge to people who are prone to psychosis. A popular narrative that a lot of these news outlets took when I looked at them was that this could happen to any one of our kids without us really knowing, but I don't think that's true, and I think that's kind of misdirecting the real issue here. The real issue being mental health outreach for children and giving them the appropriate tools to separate what's real on the internet from what's fake. If you don't have these proper tools and you're just consuming an endless loop of horror content, it can get you into a spiral of all sorts of bad things very, very quickly. This is especially true for younger kids, and this is something I'm so passionate about because this is a position I've been in myself when I was younger. When I was 11, I was first introduced to creepypasta, and reading those stories was all I did. I basically filled my mind with this stuff, and at the same time there was also a lot of stressful stuff going on in my life, so as dark as it is, I kind of think that in another universe I could have ended up like one of these kids on a news headline. This rabbit hole of thinking you can fall into, it's like an echo chamber in a way, and it has a certain gravity, a certain pull that can bend your very perception of reality. It can feel, by all means, life-altering. So yeah, with that in mind, I often ask myself, is horror even worth it? If it can have such life-altering, cataclysmic effects on a person, let alone a young child, how can this risk be worth any kind of reward? This is something I've thought about a lot. I mean, if I was presented with a button that would, remove horror entirely from the internet, a button that would, if pressed, prevent kids from worrying about monsters being under their beds, that would prevent the loss of life, even would I press it? I don't know if I would. The thing is, for all the damage it can do and has done, I think it's also done good. When handled right, horror as a genre can shed light on topics so isolating people would never think they could find that in media before. it can create careers for people too. Think of people who do this stuff on YouTube like I do. I wouldn't be here if horror didn't exist. As much as it is a double-edged sword, it's also a tool. What impact it has on a person depends entirely on the person who is using it and the person who is viewing it. The argument can be made that, yeah, maybe some people are going to use it for malicious pursuits, but maybe it's kind of a necessary evil. Maybe without the dark, the shine of the light doesn't really mean anything. I certainly can't control what other people do with horror as a genre, but even if I'm only speaking for myself when I say this, I hope you know that when things get scary, when things start changing, when it feels like everything is falling apart, reality's bending at the seams even, I hope you know this story has a happy ending. It's gonna be okay. There's no other thing it can be. And with that, thank you for watching. I also want to remind anyone watching that I do have a P.O. box now, and it is going to be listed in the description. I am most definitely going to be sounding like a broken record player before anyone actually sends me anything, but that's the way of life, ain't it? I do hope you enjoyed listening, and I'm probably going to get started on my next video, actually. My friend's birthday is coming up next week, and we're going to celebrate, so I'm looking forward to that. Shout out, friend of the channel, Jason. He is officially going to be old as fuck. But I hope you guys have a good one. I'll see you guys next week.